So let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America,
and
and
to the republic to which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with
liberty
and justice for all. Thank you. Cookie, can we have the roll call, please?
Yes. Susan Rowinski.
Present.
Cliff Robbins.
Here.
Jackie Nunez.
Here.
And Rafael Reyes.
Present. And just a reminder to any members of the public who may be listening in, if you are on the streaming, viewing the meeting through the streaming option, you can join the meeting directly to participate by going to the agenda and clicking the Zoom meeting link at the top of the agenda. And we will be taking questions using the raise function option through Zoom. You can also participate by phone by dialing 408-638-0968. Let me repeat that, 408-638-0968. And the conference ID number is 812-2929-2985. And it occurs to me just for staff, what we might want to do going forward is just put up a slide with this information so it doesn't have to be read off, just so that information is presented up front. So that's an option that might make things easier. And with that, we will move towards election of the commission chair and vice chair. And I'd like to entertain motions for those two positions.
I'll move Susan Rowinski as chair and Jackie Nunez as vice chair.
I'll second the motion. Can we have a roll call, please? Roll call vote. Cookie?
Yes. Cliff Robbins.
I vote yes.
Jackie Nunez.
Vote yes.
Rafael Reyes.
Yes.
And Susan Rowinski.
Yes.
Okay. With that, I ceremonially hand the baton over to you, Susan.
Okay, well, I guess I've got the virtual gavel now. But anyway, thank you, my fellow commissioners. It will be an honor to share. It'll be an honor to serve as the chair. And thank you, Rafael, for serving as our chair for the past year. You've done a wonderful job. So, okay, so the next item on tonight's agenda is the consent calendar. There is one item to approve, the minutes from the Commission's regular meeting of May 13th, 2020. Do I have a motion?
I move approval.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And I think, are we required to take a roll call vote, Cookie?
No, we can take a roll call vote.
Just a question of protocol.
For what it's worth,
Commissioner?
it's not required unless somebody challenges.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we've got 4-0.
And you may be on mute, Director Rinsky.
Thank you. There we are. Okay, great. Let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is public comment. For persons wishing to comment on an item not appearing on tonight's agenda. State law prevents the Commission from acting on any matter not on the agenda However, comments are welcome, and the commission will take note of them and may consider them for inclusion into future commission meetings. Cookie, do we have any speakers under public comment? Cookie, do you see? I do not see any speakers under public comment. Okay, seeing no hands. Yep.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Orinsky. There is one hand raised that I'm
Okay,
seeing.
I see. Yeah. Okay, so we have Robert Whitehair. Would you like to speak? Hello?
Robert, you may be on mute. Have we unmuted attendees?
Robert?
I believe staff needs to unmute attendees. Has that been done?
Yeah. Cookie?
And they don't show up as muted, but on my screen. But
perhaps Chair might consider calling on Adam Lorraine
Sure.
if there's a technical problem with Mr. Whitehair's
Okay.
communications.
So Adam, please. I think we're having some technical, and Cookie's not responding either.
I'm sorry, Susan. I was on the phone with Jonathan because there were some other problems. What is happening?
Yeah, we have, we're in the public comment section now, and we have two hands raised.
Oh, okay.
Robert Whitehair and Adam Lorraine.
Right. Okay. Let me click. Let me see. Okay, Adam, are you able to? Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Hooray! Thank you, Cookie.
Okay.
Good evening, commissioners and staff. My name is Adam Lorraine. I am a 20-plus year resident of our city of San Mateo. And last meeting, the commission discussed building electrification reach codes for new multifamily construction and gave a qualified approval for a mixed fuel option reach code, much like last year's reach codes, based on sort of subsequent reaching out to stakeholders. And I gave public comment supporting that at the time because I do value reach codes, and I feel like we certainly want to do all that we can to help reduce our emissions. But since that meeting, I spoke with Mr. Whitehair, who you'll hear from soon, from Fossil Free Silicon Valley, Ms. Diane Bailey, with whom many of you are familiar from Menlo Spark, about how other cities in our county have apparently managed to develop stronger reach codes for building electrification, including Brisbane, Pacifica, Menlo Park, and the county itself. And perhaps most recently, or at least somewhat recently, the county did one that requires all electric new construction for all building types and appliances in February. So based on that, I seek to ask staff whether it might be possible for San Mateo to do the same with this most recent reach code that the commission and staff are currently working on. If there's, I realize in last month's discussion, there was, we talked about how the approach that the city of Berkeley took and that the city of Mountain View specifically took may not be a good fit, but I wanted to see about these other examples that have that are apparently within our county, and if there's an opportunity, since we've waited as long as we have for the study to come out and so on, to take a little bit more time and see if it might be possible to reach for more, because it's important, and I'm sure Mr. Whitehair will explain a little more about why that is. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Mr. Whitehair, would you like to speak, please?
Oh, there it is. I got a little button that time. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity. As Adam started off, this is about the REACH codes that you folks took care of, or looked at the last meeting. So Chair Rowinski and Vice Chair Nunez, congratulations on being named chair. Thank you and your fellow commissioners for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm Robert Whitehair, and I've been living in San Mateo for 38 years. I coached Little League Baseball here for 12 years, San Mateo American at Trenta Park. My wife is a past president of Burrell Middle School PTA and one of the two founders of the longstanding cultural fair. Both sons grew up here and went to public elementary, middle, and high schools in San Mateo, which has been and continues to be a fantastic place to live. The Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission is to be commended for considering at its last meeting extending San Mateo's REACH codes to low and mid-rise multifamily construction. I especially appreciate the outreach by staff to apartment developers and that the Assistant City Manager has graciously listed me as a resource to them. I especially appreciate what Andrea Chow has done to study, understand, and develop a proposed new REACH code. But I'm deeply concerned about the future of the planet due to the climate crisis, and specifically about the significant impacts on our wonderful city from pollution, sea level rise, and ever-increasing temperatures, corresponding with ever-decreasing amounts of water for us to drink. As Adam mentioned, you all received a letter today prepared by a group of us on the peninsula. It's been signed by over 20 San Mateo residents and others who are members of substantial social and environmental organizations. And I understand that other people will be signing on as this letter goes forward. All of us are deeply concerned that REACH codes need to go much further than what has been presented so far. So 2 key points. I think I'm probably running out of time. Other cities have adopted much tougher codes. Being among the first cities to adopt REACH codes, San Mateo is to be commended for its trailblazing actions last year. However, in the years since the San Mateo's action, Brisbane, Menlo Park, Pacifica, San Jose, and Mountain View, and the county of Santa Clara have either eliminated natural gas altogether in new multifamily construction or require the installation of full electrical wiring for cooking, heating, cooling, water heating, clothes drying, and EV charging in new construction. A total of 30 cities have now adopted REACH codes, all of them stronger than what San Mateo now proposes. The second point I want to make is that voluntary compliance and eliminating gas will not work. Small differential type REACH codes have been tried in other cities, including in Palo Alto's 2016 REACH code, and it was found ineffective. Those cities with earlier differential codes have now transitioned to all electric REACH codes. If the REACH code proposal remains a simple addition to the San Mateo code that would still allow dual fuel or less with extremely minor incentives for all electric construction, we respectfully do not believe that it will be a worthwhile effort. We believe that stronger measures are necessary. As you all know, the climate crisis is real and the prospects are dire unless we take immediate action. Please adopt a strong, all-electric REACH code for San Mateo. Thank you for your time tonight.
Okay. Thank you, Adam and Robert, for your comments. I will say one thing, Kathy, there is a study session that is scheduled for these REACH codes. Has that been scheduled yet, or do we know approximately when that's going to be?
We're still working on the date of that. It might be as soon as July 20th that it goes to the City Council, which is that may seem like a far time from now, but the next meeting is the 15th and the next scheduled meeting of the council is July 20th because they have a reduced schedule during the summer.
Right. Okay, so it could be that the study session for these, for Adam and Robert could be, they could express their concerns or points of view then.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for your comments. We do appreciate them. Moving on, and like I said, because this item is not on an agenda, the commission cannot act on it, but we do appreciate your comments. I see no further hands raised. We'll move to the next agenda item, which is the new business section. And we're going to talk about a very important topic, the city's solid waste diversion efforts. And this presentation will be made by Roxanne Murray. the city's solid waste and recycling programs coordinator, and Joe La Marinera and Grant Leon of South Bayside Waste Management Authority. I will say the objective, my understanding is the objective of this agenda item is to solicit comment from both the public and the commission as it relates to the city's solid waste diversion efforts, both current and the future. The presentation that Roxanne and Joe and Grant will give will be followed by questions from the commission. And then we will move to comments from the public. And once all public comments have been heard, I'll bring the discussion back to the commission for additional comments and questions. A motion from the commission is not required for this agenda item. So on that note, Roxanne, I'll pass this on to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I just want to make sure.
Yes,
okay.
This is Susan, yep.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you, Commission, for giving us this opportunity to present before you tonight. I'm Roxanne Murray, and I'm the Solid Waste Recycling Programs Coordinator for the city, also a member of the Public Works team. And I'm fortunate enough to be here with Joe LaMariana, who is the Executive Director of the SVWMA. And Joe will give us some great insight on the programs and challenges that we're facing through the Waste Authority, as well as Grant Leon. Grant's a former City of San Mateo employee and now works for the SVWMA as a management analyst. And hopefully can you see my screen yet?
No, this is, nope.
Nope. Now?
Nope, we see you.
Well, great. I don't think you want to see me so much. It's got the slideshow up. Let me see what I'm doing wrong here. I apologize. Give me a sec. So I went to, let me get out of here. A screen share. I went to screen.
There we are.
Okay, here we go. I had it up a second ago, so here we go.
There we go.
On to the beginning. Okay. Well, again, thank you for this opportunity. Solid waste, there's a lot going on and we've got a lot to share. We want to give you an overview of what our accomplishments or our goals are for tonight. Is we want to introduce you to our partners. We want to let you know about what compliance goals that are coming before us and have been in the past. We want to let you know how we're doing and what challenges we face and what our next steps are. Our partners, we're fortunate again to have Joe and Grant from the South Bayside Waste Management Authority, which is our waste authority, or the SVWMA, Recology San Mateo County, South Bay Recycling, San Mateo County Office of Sustainability, and CalRecycle. The SVWMA the city is fortunate to be one of 12 member agencies from Burlingame to East Palo Alto. We pull our resources together to hopefully provide cost-effective services and waste reduction programs. We own the Shoreway Environmental Center in San Carlos, and that's where all the materials that Recology collects on our behalf are brought for processing. The SVWMA oversees our contract compliances with both the operator and the hauler. They also always work in the ratepayer's best interest for favorable rates for the cost of collection and disposal. And they help us with all of our state mandates to make sure we're in compliance and always have forefronts on programs. Recology provides the collection service for us, and their agreement is specifically with the City of San Mateo. They also have agreements with the other 11 member agencies, but each agreement is tailored to that city's specific needs. The contract that we currently have began in 2011. It terminates at the end of this year, but we did re-amend and restate the new agreement, and it goes on for with Recology, and they will be providing the service for the next 15 years, beginning 2021. They provide the weekly franchise collection for all residents, and that includes solid waste, garbage, recycling, and compost. They have the franchise agreement for commercial garbage services for all multifamily and commercial service. South Bay Recycling operates the Shoreway Environmental Center on behalf of the SVWMA, and that contract is specific with the SVWMA. They process all the materials that come in, and to date they've done an incredible job in difficult times to find marketplaces for our materials. And again, they transport all the materials to their final destination for processing and disposal. Again, we have a great relationship with San Mateo County Office of Sustainability, formerly Recycle Works, and they promote and sponsor all our waste diversion programs, including household hazardous waste. They promote environmental stewardship, and they promote do a lot of our education and outreach for us. Again, we'll be partnering with them as we go further down on a food recovery program. And CalRecycle, they basically are the enforcing agency. They're the agency that enforces all the regulations from the state of California. We give them all of our data. They make sure we're in compliance. Again, they're the enforcing agency, and they approve our annual waste diversion efforts. They also permit all of the landfills and oversee the processing stations for compost and recovery. So we've got goals and mandates and compliance concerns. AB 939 was established to divert 50% of the waste that was going to a landfill by 2020 and for going further. And to date, we've always been in compliance. 341 is a state overall goal. It wasn't jurisdiction specific. It was set to the state as a whole, and the goal of diverting 75% of the waste that was generated from not going into landfill via waste reduction, recycling, and compost by this year, by 2020. AB 1826 was a little more specific. It targeted commercial and multifamily dwellings to make sure that they were recycling and properly disposing of their organic waste. Unfortunately, it was very, if you have a multifamily and you have your landscape taken by your landscaper and it goes to where they process green waste, that was considered an organic program, and so it was a little vague and not quite as specific. And again, we've been in compliance with all the requirements as of 2018. Each year we report all this data, and it's a year in the rear. So right now we're giving the state all the information regarding 2019. But now we have a big gun that came in. It's SB 1383, and it's the short-lived climate action pollutant program to reduce organic waste that is going in, emitting methane waste in the air. So we're trying to capture the organic waste, not have it go into the landfill and divert it. It requires 50% diversion of organic debris going into a landfill by 2020, and that was based on 2014 as the baseline. There are enforcement provisions. So if we do not make our goals as effective as of 2020, there could be financial penalties. It requires 75% diversion of organic debris to a landfill by 2025, and it requires an establishment of an edible food recovery program for human consumption. So 20% of the waste, food waste or food that's generated in, say, at the event center, it would be required to be diverted to a recovery program such as Second Harvest Food Bank. And again, we're working with the county. The county's taking the lead on this as our partner, and we're giving our full support. We've attended all meetings, and we'll be actively involved in the establishment of the expansion of these programs. How is waste measured? How is diversion measured? From 2000 to 2006, it was a percentage. It was 50% of the waste that went into the landfill. And I think 1998 was the baseline. As of 2006, we were at 55% diversion. As of 2006, going forward into 2007, the state determined they were going to calculate waste diversion in a different method. It's how much waste is generated per day per employee, any employee within the city of San Mateo, and the residents. So for a city with our type of industry, with our type of commercial businesses, the target for waste generation is 13.3 pounds of waste per day per employee. We cannot exceed that and be within compliance. As of 2018, our average employee generates about 8.5 pounds of garbage a day. So we've met the criteria, and we're actually under the target amount. The per pound of waste generation per resident per day, the state goal is 5.8 pounds or less, and our results as of 2018 were 4.7 pounds. So how we're doing? Again, Recology collects all the waste, solid waste, garbage, recycling, and organics from residential homes. They have that specific contract. And about 64%, or 2/3 of the waste generated from the average home, does not go into a landfill from a residence. 1/3 still does. About 24% of the waste Now, this is the garbage and recycling collected by Recology and organics is diverted from landfill. But again, Recology is not the only player in town when it comes to multifamilies for recycling and for compost. Recycling services are offered at no charge, and the majority of our multifamilies do have, I think less than 1% do not have recycling services. 35% of our commercial customers, the commercial waste generated is diverted from landfill. And there are several, that does include like Safeway backhauling their organic waste. It does not include Molly Stone's or any restaurant that doesn't use Recology services. So again, those numbers are much higher, but this is based specifically on what Recology can collect and does collect. So how we're doing? We're doing pretty well. Just so you know, for the past 8 years, the city staff sits on the development review board, and we review all new development that comes in. So any new development or any change of use of an existing business goes through a solid waste review. And what we're looking for is all new development is required to have garbage, recycling, and organic service. So if any new development that's come in for the last few years has these services, they're in there. Not only are we looking to make sure they have those services, but we're looking to make sure we're maximizing the services that are within that building. So we're looking at, instead of having one container going 7 times a week, we're looking at 3 containers maybe going once a week. We're trying to reduce the amount of times that trucks are on the road. We're also trying to make sure that we're maximizing the diversion services that are being offered, as well as we're making sure that those containers are placed in a situation where they're serviced quickly and efficiently in a safe manner. So we're not blocking traffic, people can get around the truck, so and reducing truck time. Over 80% of all the construction and demolition debris that's generated in the city. So if you redo your kitchen, you're going to sign a form saying that you're going to divert at least 60+% of your waste from the landfill. And as of today, as of 2019, over 80% of our construction demolition debris does not go into landfill. 85% of all the waste that's generated at any city-sponsored event is diverted from landfill. Again, we established a Team Up to Cleanup program about 4 years ago. We had last year about 1,500 volunteers pick up over 50 cubic yards of debris. And when we say that, we're talking litter, cigarette butts, food waste wrappers. This is small debris. It's not the big stuff that you sometimes see illegally abandoned. This is litter and debris. And that's 50 cubic yards is quite a bit. Twice a year, we have annual recycling events. Unfortunately, due to shelter in place this year, we were not able to have the spring event, but these events take place at Beresford Park. We have 1,000+ residents come within 3 hours to donate Goodwill recycling for household hazards, for household reuse and clothing. We collect 2 full trucks of shredding. And about 7,500 pounds of e-waste and U-waste is collected at each of these events. And they're responsibly either recycled or properly disposed. Illegal dumping over the last 5 years, we've been seeing a 50% plus reduction of cases reported to the city where the city took responsibility. I'm going to say, I can't say that we've actually seen less reporting, but we've only had 700 in 2019. We had 727 reported locations that the city took responsibility for. We were able to work with property owners, landlords, and tenants to take responsibility for the debris that they put directly in front of their home. Last month, we discussed the climate action plan measures. They're very lofty, as you can see. We have huge strides to make within the next 10 years. Hopefully that the programs that we're implementing through the Waste Authority, our Organic Energy Program, and the requirements of SB 1383 are going to help us achieve these goals, but they are lofty and they are here, and we're doing our best to work within that measure. We've got challenges. For the SVWMA, and Joe will address these, we've got limited composting locations. There's not a new lot of places taking this material. We're fortunate to have one location in Milpitas. The secondary location that we have that takes, I think, 40% of our waste material, organic material, is in the valley. So we're traveling a long way to dispose of this material, and it's expensive. We've got limited marketplaces for recycling. And again, Joe will address the situation that happened a couple of years ago in China, where 85% of our materials were recycled in China. they closed that marketplace, and now we're competing worldwide for a minimal marketplace for our recyclable goods. We've got increased costs. The costs, because there's so many costs associated with and limited marketplaces, costs have gone up. So how do we keep those costs in line for our residents and ratepayers? On the commercial sector, organic service is at an additional charge, and trying to get somebody to add an additional cost is a challenge. If we don't have vested interests, we can see contamination issues. Fortunately, we've been very fortunate in recycling. We've had very few loads that have had over 10% or 8% contamination, but again, it's something we are constantly addressing and working with Recology. They've done a diligent job to keep contamination down. In organics, it's 10%. So we have to figure out we're always addressing contamination and space constraints. We have older buildings that weren't built for multiple containers. How do we get these services available to all of our residents? Multifamily, which I know is of interest to the Commission. Again, organic services at an additional cost. A lot of times we don't have it's a shared service. So 7 people, we have 15 people in the building, 7 people are doing the right thing and 8 aren't. How do we get ownership? How do we get people involved to take responsibility for how they properly dispose their debris? We have absentee landlords. Multiple times we've reached out to landlords in Florida and out of state or in Southern California. How do we get them to take a vested interest in what's going on at their property and on the benefit of the city as well as their residents? Again, we have the same thresholds for contamination, and it's always an issue, and again, space as well. So what are our next steps? Well, we're continue to work on oversight for new development, constantly making how can we maximize these services and incentivize waste diversion. I think this is a pretty excellent example at Passages, the new development on Concord, where we're talking close to 1,000 units. We're going to have one location where on site they will collect the debris, bring it to a compactor location. There'll be a compactor for garbage, one for recycling and one for organics. So the truck will have 3 trucks going there versus 1 truck making multiple stops around a large area. There's safety issues. We'll have much less truck time, and service will probably at the most maybe be twice a week for each container or less. We're hoping garbage has the least amount of service, and we're servicing the organics and the recycling containers on a more regular basis. We need to revise, and we're working on revising the current rate structure for all sectors, not just the commercial and multifamily, but for residential property too. We need to continue to motivate waste diversion while still covering all the cost of our services. We've done such a great job on our residential end, although we still need to do better, but we need to make sure we're still covering the cost of the services that we're providing. We're having 3 trucks driven by Teamster drivers going to every home in the city on a weekly basis, and it's expensive. So we need to make sure we're always covering those costs while always motivating waste diversion. We need to offer incentives for diversion. Possibly how to maybe and we're working with HF&H as a consultant. They're experts in this field. They've helped multiple jurisdictions throughout the city, including our waste authority and us in the past. We're in the early stages of providing all the information that we're requiring, and we're hoping to see some options hopefully by September of this year. Again, multifamilies. We via Recology and our waste, the SVWMA, we're creating outreach material. We've been reaching out to landlords and property owners. Now we're going to reach out to the individual residents. Every resident will receive a mailer within the next couple of months. I think probably by August, if not before. It'll be in multiple languages, trying to create an interest. How do we motivate the residents to ask their landlord to work with us to motivate the landlords to add this additional service, and maybe even take a leadership role within the property. But the more outreach we can get and going directly to the residents versus the landlord, we'll see how we're hoping that will help motivate. And again, we're going to continue to constantly working with our property management groups and property owners, but we've been targeting the large property management groups, trying to get as many on as we can to grow this program. We're providing tools, kitchen pails, similar to the ones you have at home, but these are a little bit more, actually residents will be getting these going forward as well, but they're taller and thinner. They fit easy underneath your kitchen sink. We'll have clear guidelines that are very clear and pictorial in multiple languages. We make sure via waste audits that we're placing signage above all containers for garbage, recycling, and organics. And where is the best container placement? We do a site audit to make sure we're putting each container where it's best used, trying to work with reducing contamination, but also incentivizing waste diversion. And we're providing constantly modifying and providing move-in and move-out kits. When people move into apartments or multifamilies and they move out, there's a lot of waste sometimes left behind. It can be cardboard boxes, it can be leftover furniture. How we're giving them the tools. This is where it goes. This is how you dispose of it, and always promoting our twice yearly cleanups with Recology for residents and multifamily dwellings to take advantage of those that are built into the cost of their services. So they're again provided at no additional charge. And on that note, I'll hand it over to Joe and Grant, but I do want you to know that you can always reach out to me. I'm always available, and please don't hesitate. I appreciate working with you at any time. So thank you, and on to Joe, if I can figure out how to get on my screen.
Thank you so much, Roxanne. Really appreciate the invitation. Welcome to Chair Wanowski and to the commissioners. Nice to see you, Jackie, from the OOS. We cross paths from time to time. Before I get into my presentation, I hope you guys recognize the excellence that our longtime friend and highly committed colleague, Roxanne Murray, brings to the city of San Mateo. She's extraordinary. I've had the privilege of working with her for probably 20 years now. We worked together at BFI, that turned into Allied Waste, that turned into Republic Services. And then she came to the city and I went to the county. And we sort of all ended up here. Roxanne also serves as our vice chair of the technical advisory committee for the SVWMA. So she is all in, and your city is very well represented by Roxanne's efforts. And also, of course, board member Rick Bonilla, council member Bonilla is quite a vocal advocate of ours and of your community, of course, at the board level. DPW Director Brad Underwood, I see is on the call tonight. And also Deputy Director Madzuka is a familiar face at our board meeting. So welcome to all of those folks. I also just want to acknowledge real quick, Cookie Kaplan, Cookie's daughter and my daughter played softball together many years ago. And we have some very fond memories from that. So all about community there. And then before I go any further, I must acknowledge former city manager and DPW director, Larry Patterson. Larry has had a monumental impact on our agency, first as a board member when at that time the board was composed of high-level staff officials. And in that capacity, Larry served not once but twice as our board chair. And he did so during a really challenging time. I've been affiliated in one way or another with the agency almost 18 years. And I have to tell you, Larry leaves a very, very big legacy with us. And it's important to me that gets remembered. He really has had extraordinary efforts here. So with that, I'd like to also introduce my colleague, Grant Ligon. Grant is a senior management analyst with us. And some of you, I hope you recognize Grant from his days at the city of San Mateo, where he worked in the DPW department. So Grant is doing great things for us here at the agency, and as management analyst, I think it gives him license to get involved in lots of cool stuff. Some of it's not so cool, some of it's routine and mundane, but that's kind of how we roll at times. But he's definitely engaged and is a real asset to our team. So really welcome Grant on board. So there'll be a couple of slides that he'll jump in on there. And then again, as I'm pulling the slide show up, I will mention it will be our pleasure that whenever we are able to resume some sense of normalcy in our world here, we would love to invite the commission over to our 16-acre facility in San Carlos and take a tour, see what the work is like on the front lines. It's really something that has to be seen firsthand. It almost doesn't do it justice to hear a person talking about it with a PowerPoint. You've got to sort of experience the visceral front lines of the activity and the action, the hard work, the acknowledgement of all the workers in inclement weather doing what they do. We've got about 400 people based on this 16-acre site in San Mateo. I hope it looks familiar to you. So hopefully some of you have been there at different times. We're right off Highway 101, right in between the Holly Street and Ralston Avenue, the Holly Street and Ralston roads on the bay side of that. So we are on Shoreway. So you're seeing an aerial view of our facility. There are several major buildings that are immediately apparent. To the lower right is our MRF, our material recovery facility. That's where the blue cart material goes. We'll get into that in a bit. And on the left is our transfer station. That's where the black and green organic material goes. You'll also notice there are 2,700 solar panels on our site. And at the time they were installed 10 years ago, this was the largest solar installation in San Mateo County. It's my understanding we're still in the second slot. We do have an intention to expand this. We're probably not that far away from refreshing those panels, with today's technology. And you see some buildings on the back part of the property that would be good candidates for additional solar. And right now, the solar that's generated allows us to meet about 50% of the entire site's power needs, or 100% of the highly mechanized recycling center, the MRF's needs. So moving forward. There we go. Roxanne has already touched on this, so I'm not going to belabor it. I'll get into other issues, but she talked about the formation of the agency. Technically, we are a joint powers authority. That is a standalone legal entity when multiple public agencies combine for various reasons. In this case, the drivers were cost efficiencies, just like when you go to Costco and you buy in bulk. When all these 10 cities plus the county plus the West Bay Sanitary District combine their resources together, they can expect to get better rates on all aspects of the collection, processing, and handling of all these waste materials. And also, you get the benefit of technical expertise. Our staff in the administrative office is very lean and mean. We have 9.5 full-time equivalent staff, and we have 5 fellows that help with our outreach program. But by and large, and on a comparative basis, compared to the Department of Environment in San Francisco or our friends at Stop Waste, both of those agencies have probably over 50 people. I do realize that the Department of Environment takes on a broader range of topics than ours, but they have a core that overlays with our topics as well. You can see the stats in terms of the representation. We handle about 60% of San Mateo County's solid waste recycling and composting needs. And the facility handles almost 500,000 tons of material at this site each and every year. It's a big time operation. It's one of the largest in the state. If we had to rank it, there's no formal rankings, but if we had to rank it, we're definitely in the top 25, might be closer to 20, just to give you an idea of scale and magnitude. The entire system, when you include our agency's minor costs, the administrative costs, and then the Recology cost and South Bay Recycling, our 2 partners, contracted partners cost, we're about $130 million operation. And much like a restaurant, Recology represents the front of the house. They're the ones that get in the trucks with the giant Recology logos. They drive out into your neighborhoods each and every day. They pick up garbage, recycling, and composting at your home, your office, or your multifamily dwelling, as Roxanne was alluding to earlier. They bring that material back to the site and they bring it into one of those 2 buildings that I just described a moment ago. And then they literally open up the back of the truck, they drop the load onto the floor, and then they either drive back out onto the route and pick up another load, or if they're done for the day, they go in the back, they fill up with gas, they park the vehicle, and they do a post trip, and then they're out, they're done. Once the material goes on the ground, our other really valued contractor, South Bay Recycling, or SBR, is the acronym we use. They're responsible for handling the material from that point forward. So like a restaurant, Recology is the front of the house, SBR is the back of the house. So it's probably not very likely that you recognize SBR's name or logo. But believe me, they provide an essential service. They have to handle the material, they have to aggregate it, they have to separate it, they have to get it ready for market. They load it into whatever vehicles is going to take the material to whatever destination. The recyclable. We'll talk about that in a minute. So let me not get ahead of myself here. A moment ago, I just alluded to what goes in what building. By the way, these buildings are about 70,000 square feet each, which is roughly equivalent to a Costco, just to give you an idea. And we are on highway. You'll see down in the lower left corner, we're right off of Highway 101. That perpendicular, the parallel road right next to it is a frontage road. It's called Shoreway Road. That's actually our street address. What you also see is in the left, about the middle of the slide, is a small building. That's the Recology administrative office. Our agency owns it. We lease it to them for $1 a year as part of the franchise agreement that Roxanne alluded to a moment ago, that we have just restated and amended through the year, through 2035, December 31st of 2035. So Recology has demonstrated their professionalism and their ability to work in all kinds of with all kinds of challenges, and after about a 2-year process of renegotiating and a little give and take on both sides, 11 of our 12 agencies have signed on for this. There's some discussion with the other agency right now. So in the back of this site, you'll see a whole bunch of vehicles parked back there. If you can make out the big rigs with the red tractors on them, those are SBR's long haul fleet. We have 23 of those. They have 23 of those, excuse me. So they take all the material that Recology brings back to the site, and ultimately most of the material leaves the site in those trucks. Recology's got a fleet of about 150 trucks, and we've got collection vehicles, big giant vehicles that come in your neighborhood. So we'll talk about those more in a minute. This is a photograph of inside our transfer station. Essentially, it's a very large cavernous building. Roxanne and I go way back. We worked on this site together. And last year, so it's near and dear to our hearts. Last year, we handled 229,000 tons of trash and 122 tons of organic material in this facility. And we've got plans to expand what it is and how we handle things in there. We also handle construction and demolition material too. So I heard people talking about REACH codes and a variety of construction related things. Construction demolition material from job sites is brought here, and we bring it to a processor in San Jose to handle it. So the material from the transfer station primarily goes to either Ox Mountain landfill. That's the material that's left over from all the sorting. We just re-upped a contract with them through 2030. These, as you can tell, are long-term contracts that give all sides continuity in pricing, so you can build a cost model moving forward that has known components to it, and that's really important for rate setting, especially at the local level. When every year Roxanne and Matt and Brad and Rick are all reviewing and contemplating what the rate strategy will be for the citizens of San Mateo. So the garbage goes to Ox Mountain landfill. The organic material goes two places. The 122,000 tons of material that we saw in the previous slide gets split between Newbie Island, which is owned by Republic Services, and it's in Milpitas, and Blossom Valley Organics North, which is owned by Recology. And that's out in a little teeny town just south of Stockton. It's way out in the middle of nowhere, but it's quite a drive out there. And we're looking at ways to intercept this material and harvest the material value in different ways. We're very, very excited about some of the cool projects that we'll talk about in a moment here. Now, going across the property, the Material Recovery Facility, or the MRF, as we call it in our industry. I have no idea why we pick that acronym, but we did. This is a very highly automated, highly mechanized, two-story sorting apparatus. So when the Recology trucks come back full from the neighborhood and they drop their mixed loads of material, everything in the blue cart, all those materials have to be sorted and categorized by grade of material so that we can either move it along in the system and avoid sending it to landfill, or we can ultimately, we'd love to sell it and sell it at its highest price. And the way you sell it at its highest price is get the cleanest, most consistent portions of mixed paper or cardboard or different colors of glass or metals. That the manufacturers that buy this material as source material want it as clean as possible, and they don't want any contaminants, anything that isn't what it is they're buying and manufacturing. So this is a big time operation, and right now we're in the middle of phase one of a two-phase project that will ultimately be about a $16 million project. We're about to wrap up phase one in mid-July. That's going to help us automate some of these sorting lines so that we can go faster and get a higher quality material in direct response to the international change of standards that happened 2 years ago. It started in China with the national sword set of regulations where they unilaterally, almost overnight, just completely changed the contamination standards to a level that no MRF in America or even in the Pacific Rim could match that standard. So now we've gone to other markets and there are other demands and other needs in those markets, and we're trying to be responsive to that. So speaking of markets, where does this material go? Well, the glass goes to a company, again, private entity called Strategic Materials. They have an extremely modern glass sorting and smelting operation up in Fairfield. They've got these plants around the country, and we're lucky to have one really within a couple of hours of us. We're very lucky to have that. And they recognize they're in a major market, so much of that material goes there. It's not on this slide, but some of the material also goes to the Gallo wineries out in the Central Valley. It gets remade into wine glasses, or wine bottles rather, so wine containers. So that's pretty cool. The fiber materials, which is cardboard, the different grades of cardboard and mixed paper, that's what used to go directly to China. And again, in March of 2018, that changed immediately. We are no longer able to send that there. I think there's some high quality cardboard, a very small percentage is still going to China, but most of the material has been redirected. So we now have sought out our contractor. I shouldn't take credit for it. Our contractor, SBR, has a really impressive and extensive material brokerage firm unit within their operation. They're one of the top 3 in America, and we have definitely benefited from that association during this whole transition because they've got some tremendous relationships and they bring tremendous leverage into the marketplace when they're dealing with buyers of these materials. So there have been some instances in the last couple of years where some of these materials in other jurisdictions have actually not been able to find markets, and they've actually ended up landfilling it. And from our standpoint, that's about as blasphemous as you can get. We do not want to landfill it. We will not landfill it. It is absolutely unequivocally a last resort, and we haven't landfilled it. I want to say that very emphatically. So that's great news. So what are the markets? It's Vietnam, it's South Korea, it's India, Malaysia. So these are some of the other markets that we've redirected that material to. And I'll make a comment. China, when we were dealing with China, they had a highly capitalized receiving and transportation system on the other end. In other words, they had put in huge investments in their docks and their highways to get the material in a highly automated way, unloaded from the cargo ships, loaded onto transport vehicles, and out on a modern highway, bring it off to the fiber plants deeper into the Chinese countryside, if you will. That infrastructure does not exist in some of these markets that we're talking about, or if it does, it's nowhere near as sophisticated and as comprehensive as what the market is demanding. So over the last couple of years, there's been a ripple effect of certain markets having maxed out and they simply can't take enough of this material. And again, that's where these relationships come in, and SBR has just been superior in this regard. So I definitely want to give them their props in that. The other notable item that has come out of this is China used to pay us a pretty good penny for, well, maybe not a penny, a pretty good amount for this material. And of course, these are commodities. So every day the commodity values go up and down for each type of commodity. And when we've shifted to the other markets, several things have happened. One is the buyers in those markets, in some cases, they don't pay us anything. They will simply accept the materials and we're happy because it diverts it from a landfill. Or in some cases, we actually pay them to take the material, which seems kind of backwards and crazy, but that's what the market dictates. The other thing is they have also elevated their contamination standards, meaning that they now demand cleaner material too. And the main reason is because they can. They've gotten this surplus of material flooding their markets from all of us around the Pacific Rim, from Australia and Japan and the US, et cetera, sending it to them. And now they can pick and choose. So they pick the cleanest material. Why wouldn't you? The material that you pull out has to be landfilled or somehow handled, disposed of. So that has really radically changed the market. And that's actually why we've reinvested in our plant, even though the plant's only 10 years old. We're doing some really, really cool upgrades to this equipment. And lastly, the containers, the metal containers, aluminum, tin, plastics, those go to different markets domestically. And we continue to have very strong markets in the containers, meaning the glass and the cans and bottles. And I'll address probably one of the big questions we get all the time is, what about plastics? So China used to take some of the low-grade plastics. If you look under a plastic product that has the chasing triangle logo on there and it has a number inside that logo, those numbers each represent a chemical composition of the material of that product. So numbers 1 and 2 are very high quality. We have consistently strong markets for that, and we actually get very good commodity value from that. And when we receive that money, it goes back into the overall budget, and it goes to offset and lower program cost. It in no way, shape, or form covers the program, never has and probably never will. So I want to dispel that myth because we get that all the time. Oh, it's recycling, it's free. It is not free. It costs a lot of money to handle and process this material. And the revenues that we get in certain categories of the materials recovered simply offset a portion of those costs. So I want to be very clear on that. And as you can see on the slide, some of the materials that this material gets converted into is either reworking into the beverage and bleach and Tide bottles, those kinds of things, or insulation, or now if you go to Patagonia and a number of other forward-thinking clothing manufacturers and designers, in the last couple of years, they've been getting more into clothing design, which is phenomenal. So I want to encourage everybody to be very aware when you're buying products or materials. We must develop these markets and continue to buy these materials, or there's nowhere to move them. So this is a really essential part of the process. You can collect it, you can process it, you can ship it somewhere, but if consumers don't end up buying the material, then the whole thing collapses. So that's a really important part of this discussion. I've already touched on the China's national sword policy. To give you an idea, we were very proud of the output of our plant. We were one of the most modern plants around. We recovered 93% of all the material, all the blue cart material that went into the plant. We recovered 93% of it. And now because of this radical change in the marketplace, our batting average has dipped pretty considerably. We're now recovering about 87 or 88% of the material going in there. The main difference are the low-grade plastics, the plastics 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7s. When you look on the bottom, you'll see that. So it's strawberry baskets, it's styrofoam, it's different clamshells, those kinds of things. We're not totally sure what China was doing with those, but now that they're not accepting it anymore, there is no market for that material, and we now have to landfill it. So that's a major step backwards, and it's pretty disappointing. I'll be happy to try to field any questions after the slides here. So some of the exciting things that we're doing right now, there's two major initiatives going on. I mentioned the MRF upgrades. So we're installing new equipment. The equipment will allow us to handle more material faster and get a higher quality of material output and get more of the higher quality material. So both of those are all really good attributes for our program, and we hope to recover more revenue to offset the cost of this. And I should also mention, last summer, we completed a refunding of our agency debt during a almost historically low market. And we were able to pull $20 million out in proceeds while still reducing our annual debt service by $500,000 a year. That's a pretty extraordinary situation, and I want to really compliment our senior finance manager and Grant Ligon and others that were involved in that, our legal team and a whole crew, that it took almost a year for us to do that. So it's almost akin to refinancing your house, right? You pull money out to refurbish your kitchen, and somehow your monthly principal and interest is much lower than it was before, and yet you still have this money. So about half that $20 million was the difference in the rates, and about half of it was net proceeds we were able to pull out. So it's paying for these major upgrades. So we're able to do this without increasing rates to the ratepayer for these projects. So the second major project we're doing is a really cool project. It's called, we're calling it Organics to Energy. We're identifying two waste streams that are very rich in organic material. The first one is called source separated organics, SSO. That's the food waste that comes out of restaurants and in any sort of institutional food preparation environments. And the second source is, this is really cool, is actually garbage. We are targeting organic rich garbage that comes from certain locations, certain institutions, certain buildings, where either they're already participating in an SSO program, or for whatever reason, they don't want to, or they don't have the control mechanisms to do it right. So we're identifying these loads, and we have now, over the last 2.5 years, we've spec'd out a $5 million pilot. We got the funding last summer. We bought the equipment. We installed the equipment. In March, we finished the very last item on our checklist. And what happened in March? The COVID shutdown, the quarantine. What happened in the quarantine? No restaurants. So we've got this beautiful $5 million pilot that at the moment is sitting there. We're waiting for the food material to come back into the waste stream so that we can cost efficiently flip the switch and start this process. We have yet to start it. I cannot tell you how supremely frustrating it is. The idea you can see from the slides at the bottom, or the pics at the bottom of this slide, that the material comes in pretty raw, it gets sorted, it gets cleaned up, it gets turned into a liquid mash, and it then gets loaded into a tanker truck, and then it will go to one of 4 and possibly 5 wastewater treatment plants. And at those plants, they will harvest the methane gases that are released and the biogases from that process, and they'll use it as a clean energy source. So we're creating a clean energy source for our local communities from garbage and from the food waste, which is really cool. The long-term plan is, if our proof of concept in the pilot works, and we've done a number of mini pilots, so we feel very strong and very confident about this. We want to expand this about 4 times as big as what this is. It's actually a pretty big pilot. When it gets going, it's going to be between 50 and 75 tons of material a day. And if this all bears out, when we expand it, it'll be operating over 200 tons of material a day. So really cool. And I can't mention this program without acknowledging San Mateo County and the Office of Sustainability, because they have contributed a $1 million grant to this project. And the state of California CalRecycle contributed a $2 million grant. So our $5 million pilot actually is using $2.25 million worth of local funds. So I think this is an extraordinary project, and we've gotten extraordinary efforts from our team and our staff to deliver a $5.5 million project for literally less than half of that. And it's something I'm very proud of. I'll be prouder when the thing's up and running and we're actually delivering the material to the wastewater plant and they're using it for their energy needs. So that's my little pat on the back there. Okay, this would be a good chance for me to catch my breath, get a little gulp of some iced tea, and I'm going to turn this over to the next two slides to my wonderful colleague, Grant Ligon. So Grant, take it away.
Hi, great. Thanks, Joe. I think my video was stopped, so thank you for putting it on. Great, fantastic.
Okay.
Hello. So again, thanks, Joe, for the intro, and it's a great segue into kind of our sustainability actions, which obviously is of interest for you all and the greater community. It's great because it really dovetails with what Joe was just saying. Those two major projects have that really just first and foremost. And it's nice too, because in looking at you all's recently adopted updated climate action plan, it also dovetails with your solid waste 1 through 3 measures, which I was happy to see are about 10% of your estimated reductions to be attained by 2050. So small, but still significant. And so I guess exactly how would that work? So for example, with your solid waste measure 1 for increased composting, they're both that initiative that you all are trying to upgrade, as well as our O2E, are kind of achieving the same purpose, trying to limit the methane from the food waste that would decompose at landfills. And so there's probably a chance for a lot more collaboration on that. We'd be glad to discuss in terms of the targeting Joe's mentioning and how it's focused. And then your solid waste measures 2 and 3, just again, get right at the heart of the other major project, the MRF Phase 1 upgrades, because as Joe mentioned, our whole goal is to sort more and better. And so again, to extract more of that, to not lead to the landfill and decomposition, emissions, and overall waste and unsustainable practice. And then thirdly, your solid waste measure 3 focused on sorting, reduction, reuse, education, and programs. That isn't quite as directly related to these two projects, but in our new long-range plan adopted a few months ago, there's a huge section, unlike previous plans, because as we all know, that's really become at the forefront of our industry and in general, is to try, obviously follow the, reduce, reuse, recycle kind of paradigm. And so we'd be glad also to discuss collaboration in that as well, as it seems like a major component of your solid waste measures. In terms of other sustainability actions, as Joe showed the overhead view of our operations with the 765 kilowatt array, which doesn't sound like too much now, but again, in 2011, that was a big deal. That's definitely still helping us out with, as Joe mentioned, half of our power needs. And the other half, we're glad to have opted up to ECO 100 from PCE, as I'm sure you all are familiar with. So we're really happy that's been initiated the last few years. And you can see our pie chart here of our emissions profile from our last inventory in 2017. And with that PCE and our solar and other activities kind of tackling the very small slices at the top left, it's really a good time. And as Joe mentioned a little bit before with the Recology vehicles, the massive Class 8 trucks that you see coming down your streets, those are really the big emissions burn that we need to address. And so it's great timing because we have to with Recology's new franchise agreement and their new purchasing of trucks. And so as you can see, that pie chart's about 2/3 of our total emissions profile of about 10,000 metric tons per year. And so that's the large green slice. And then the next one is the SBR trucks, those 23 tractor trailers that are also diesel. And so we would love to turn those greener, obviously. So next slide, I guess. Segue to that. Great. So on that topic, we call it alt fuels, and it really dovetails nicely also with your all's climate action plans, not just from you all, but especially the city of Menlo Park with its, it's not called EV first policy like you all kind of mentioned in your in your measure CF3 for clean fleets. It's called Sustainable Vehicle Fleet Policy for Menlo Park that was passed a few months ago. And similar to how there were some comments from the public about kind of competing in the right direction and trying to improve REACH codes. I feel like this is a great avenue for that kind of focus and collaboration as well too, and having us all push in the right direction because fortunately EV trucks and these heavy duty have opened up recently and there are manufacturers now. So Menlo Park's policy, hopefully yours to come soon, other member agencies. This is all great because that dovetails with our goal here to reduce and hopefully eliminate the emissions as much as we can from our fleet. So exactly what does that mean for our Recology fleet? So those 145 or so trucks, these are 60,000 pound gross weight trucks, the large Class 8 diesel, very loud trucks that come by your houses at 4 and 5 in the morning. We'd love to turn that electric if we can. So we're studying that now. Although we did switch to renewable diesel, again, it's renewable in the sense that the products and the process to make it are better than petroleum diesel, but there's still emissions there, and we'd love to get those out if possible. So we are considering an EV pilot. If you're interested, I would encourage you to tune in to our Zero Waste Committee meeting right before our coming board meeting in June with Councilmember Rick Bonilla will also be attending. And his kind of championing and other members championing of that is very instrumental because all of your board members' support, the active citizens, et cetera, are great because we need to better understand what level of support there is so that if there is a price premium or if there are other difficulties, that we can still feel that necessary support to move in that direction. So we'll learn a lot more about this pilot and present that this coming month and in the future, and really encourage your participation in that. And of course, EVs, as with Menlo Park's policy, as with your CF3 and other measures, that's the future. Unfortunately, it's come for our industry too. It just took a little longer. So what you see here is actually the Generation 2 BYD truck in Palo Alto. So if you ever are around Palo Alto, as one of our colleagues is, he sees this come down his street, and it's pretty remarkable that they can fuel that 60,000 pound truck with 300 kilowatt hours worth of battery power. So again, these are sustainability actions, and we look forward to seeing how that can work in tandem with your caps and satisfy residents who would like less emissions, less noise, less odor, et cetera. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Grant. Really good insights. Appreciate it. If I could just make a couple of comments real quick. I'm sure Roxanne is looking at her noise ordinances right now. I think in every community they're different, but the Recology trucks are limited to the local noise ordinances, and usually that's 6 a.m. So I do want to make that clear, probably not 4 or 5 a.m. Unless in a commercial only zone. That might be a little bit different there, and that's it. The other item, if I could, is the Zero Waste Committee is not a Brown Acted open meeting. It's an internal meeting. Our board meetings are certainly open and Brown Acted, and certain other committees of ours are, but that particular one is not. But Grant's point is an excellent one. We really would appreciate support at the community level, because one of the reasons we're moving so aggressively in this area with the alternative fuels, normally that's not something that we have historically inserted ourselves with. Recology would simply buy the trucks, and we said, okay, and we worked out the cost later, but we have definitely engaged our voice in their purchasing decision, and we're doing it in a partnership way. And I really want to commend Recology. This is new turf for them, and they're being very open-minded about it. But they've got their interests to protect. We have ours, and we want to align our operations with your guys' cap requirements and aspirational goals. That's the only way our community is going to move forward on these things. So good stuff there. So it's very exciting between the improvements at the MRF, the solar expansion, the alternative fuels, the organics to energy. We've got some really cool projects cooking. And I should also mention, these are projects that are leading our industry. These are, in some cases, it's the first in the nation that we're adopting the organics to energy variations of it. So it's really exciting stuff. And I want to commend our board for being completely on board in support of this stuff. They have been real champions for us. So can't say that enough. Okay, so let's talk about another challenge. Yikes, battery safety. Roxanne and Grant are cringing right now. I'm cringing right now. In September of 2016, September 7th at 8:35 p.m., not that I remember, I was 5 weeks on the job with the agency, and I was at home on my exercycle, and all of a sudden my phone was blowing up, and I got the word that there was a four alarm fire at our MRF. And basically it shut down the MRF for 4 months while we rebuilt and had to replace almost, but not quite, all the equipment in there. It fried all the electricity. Miraculously, it didn't damage the structure of the building. We had a lot of structural engineers go through it, and we are really fortunate. There were some engineering designs in the roof of the building. There are vents that are heat activated in the event of a fire that open up. So the flames actually, it caused a sort of a vacuum effect. So the flames actually went up and out, a chimney effect, I should say, excuse me, as opposed to staying in the building and having the structure itself catch on fire and be reduced to nothing. So that was an outstanding engineering effort. And the outcome was, we don't know it for sure, but we do know that lithium-ion batteries are a very serious problem for us. The overall fire caused $8.5 million of damage. I am thrilled to say not one person got injured. The SBR staff that was working that swing shift that night did everything they could to put the fire out. And when it clearly was getting away from them, their job is to evacuate immediately, and they evacuated by the book, and I am thrilled that nobody was injured there. However, we had 100 firefighters from up and down the peninsula, everywhere from Colma and South San Francisco down to Woodside and Redwood City, and I think some Palo Alto folks were there too. There's a reciprocating relationship with the public safety community. So they put it out, and here's the outcome. As I said, 4 months it was closed. 70 people were furloughed, very sadly, into the holidays. We had the plant up and running in January, which was a phenomenal feat. Definitely want to credit our technical group, Hillary Gans and Dwight Herring, the general manager of SBR, and also the insurance company. Their claims folks were first rate. They got us back into business. We also had business interruption insurance. So we actually were financially made whole. But here's the problem. The insurance company, in the next policy year, when we looked to get a quotation from them, they basically fired us. They said, we're not going to do this anymore. There's too much risk. The trend is growing in the wrong direction. We're not doing this. So since that time, we have had increasingly harder and harder time finding insurance for our operations because of the proliferation of lithium-ion battery fires. This is a real existential problem for our industry, and we have got to find ways to intercept these materials before they make it into our facilities. And this is true of anybody who's operating with any unknown materials. It could be UPS, it could be the U.S. Postal Service, it could be our sister organizations in San Francisco, or the Sunnyvale Smart Station, or South City's Blue Line Transfer. It's a very frightening topic, and let me give you the dollar cost, not only the safety issues, but the dollar cost. So before our fire insurance for the entire property, covering $60 million worth of property, was $179,000 a year, and we had a $5,000 deductible. So let me repeat that: $179,000 a year with a $5,000 deductible. We just got quotations for policy year July 1 to June 30th of this upcoming fiscal year, $1.5 million with a $1.5 million deductible. So this is, every year it gets harder. And also we have 7 insurers. No one insurer would take on this risk. So this is scary stuff. We have done a lot of things to harden our facility, including putting much more fire suppression equipment in there, more extensive sprinkling systems. One thing we learned is that a conveyor system that we operate in the plant is actually a very efficient way to distribute fire. The fire started in one of our processing equipment, automated pieces of equipment. The battery pack, we suspect, we have a video of it where it starts. We suspect it went in there and the mechanics breached the battery pack. And the next thing you know, it's like 4th of July in there. And people responded, they ran over and were grabbing fire hoses. There's some automated sprinklers that kick in. But by the time all of that happened, the fire was actually being conveyed on the conveyor belts to other parts of the plant. And it's just crazy scary there. So we are on a mission, both at the state level and even the national level, our agency. We're working with Assemblymember Kevin Mullen. He has authored and we have sponsored AB 1509, which is a bill that, if passed, will provide a battery take-back program so that hopefully these batteries never make it even into our site or into our plant. Right now, we will accept the batteries in one of those orange bags you see there, or a plastic Ziploc bag on top of your garbage cart. On top of your garbage cart. We don't want to have any batteries of any sort inside the containers. When those materials are collected on top of the carts, the garbage cart, the black cart, the Recology driver will get out and he or she will put them in a designated bucket. And then when they get back to the site, they put them in a designated barrel. We've never had one incident of any problem with that. And then it gets sealed and it gets shipped off to a recycler. The problems are always when the material goes inside the cart and then it goes through and it gets run over by a big tractor or it goes in the mechanized equipment. So we're real excited about AB 1509. We had a lot of momentum last year. It actually passed the assembly 63-0. I had the privilege of presenting to to two different assembly subcommittees with Assembly Member Mullen. He and I presented on the safety, and 63-0, we got it passed. And then what happened was two things happened. It went to the Senate, and the battery industry, the consumer battery industry, sort of woke up. They saw what was happening. They saw the Senate's Environmental Quality Committee several Fridays ago on behalf of another bill. So our bill got frozen and put in a timeout, suspension, like 97%. You have to handle them responsibly. And what we've also learned is when they're dead, they're not actually dead. They actually retain a residual charge to them. And that's the dangerous part. So that's my spiel on battery safety. It's actually really serious and it's a big threat to our industry. So that concludes my presentation. I would be very happy to take any questions at this time. Or Grant, my colleague.
Okay, great. This is Chair Rowinski. Thank you, Grant, Joe, and Rosemary. At this point, what we'll do is we'll take questions from each of the commissioners before moving to the public. With that, Raphael, why don't you start off with some of your questions for any of the speakers?
Sure, thank you very much. Extremely informative presentations, really helpful in understanding what's going on, and really incredible work, frankly, under very challenging and dynamic conditions. My first question for Mr. LaMariana is, you've described a number of big challenges and big moves that the agency is making to address these challenges. Can you talk a little bit about the financial picture for the agency, given all the balls you've got in the air?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. It's almost hard where to begin. I'm very proud, as you can hear, of some of the financial gymnastics that we were able to accomplish last year with the refunding of the bond. And that's helped us move forward in a way that really mitigated the impact to our ratepayers, you and I and our households and our families. But we do have some real financial challenges ahead of us, no question about it. Roxanne alluded to some of them. It appears that every time we renew a major contract, we are seeing a pretty good step up from where we currently are to where the market is currently there. So it's not a function of just, one contractor sort of being opportunistic and taking advantage of it. These are all RFPs, all of these are public procurement bidding process. Believe me, we have very strict protocols on that, and Grant is at the point of those. And I want to commend Grant and our technical team and our legal team for keeping us on the right course. Anytime you're talking about public dollars, it's really critical to maintain integrity with that. But it's very challenging. I'll give you some examples. I alluded to the new contract that we just negotiated with Ox Mountain Landfill. Well, if you look at the geography of where we are on the peninsula, how many regional landfills do you think we have direct access to? We have one, Ox Mountain Landfill in Half Moon Bay. At the moment that facility closes, we are in a world of hurt financially because the material will have to go somewhere. So we can do two things. One is we can reduce the amount of material. That's our mission, is to divert as much and shrink the amount of material that goes there and find other ways to harvest the resources that, we don't see it as waste product. We see them as resources to be recovered. Mm-hmm. And so that is our mission right here, right now. And so we want to find other homes for it. But the other one is there will be a moment in truth at Ox Mountain Landfill. And I'm not a shill for them. I don't work for them. I'm a public official. They work for my previous employer, but no connection here. But I will say this, forgetting who owns the landfill, it is the only operational viable landfill in the county at the moment. Everything else is shut down. So that makes it a distinct asset to our community. So they have, every year they do a mathematical modeling based on their remaining capacity that they have under their permit. And every year that number changes based on the inflow of materials going there. So the last numbers that I saw were they had just over 20 years of capacity left at that site. So that's notable. The second item that's very notable is the active site that they have is under 200 acres. However, they own 2,200 acres there, including the next canyon over. And I know from my previous insights, having worked for that company, that there's been a vision on them of trying to get their permit extended and for the future being able to use that second canyon. So I'm not going to go on record and support that. I'm just saying it's something for us as the community to be aware of, that is an asset that when the permit expires and it's full, we're going to be talking about long distance shipping of material, which gets really expensive really fast. And in this RFP that we just did about 6-8 months ago, we got 2 responses, and we were delighted that we got a second one, and that was down in San Jose. But it turned out that the cost to transport the material was a distinct disadvantage for that bidder. So we saw in real dollars what the differential was, and it was about a 20% differential on top of the 20% increase that Ox Mountain finally settled on. So those are some pretty big numbers. We're seeing very similar things in the organics processing marketplace. There are very few organics processors that are on the industrial magnitude and order and magnitude that we require. We're one of the biggest programs in the state. And there are very few of those facilities out there. And there's even fewer of those facilities that have available capacity within their permit to take on our material. So that puts us in a very a position of non-leverage, when we're soliciting bids, and we're actually in a process right now in that. I'm not going to go any further with that because it hasn't yet been presented to our board. But it's very apparent that these kinds of forces are at work. Again, being over on the peninsula, typically disposal and processing sites are oftentimes over in the Central Valley or in the East Bay or way south of us. So it puts us at an economic disadvantage when you have to transport the material so far. So those are a couple of recent examples. But I do think that our working with the Recology team to restate and amend their franchise agreement through 2035 was a mutual benefit, but definitely a benefit to our ratepayers. I can tell you explicitly where there were financial benefits that we presented to our board, and our board concurred that this was definitely to our advantage. So those are some things that we're confronted with.
Great. Well, extremely interesting. Obviously, the Ox Mountain situation is going to be particularly important. And I imagine that the organics to energy pilot also presents an alternative diversion pathway to some degree, right? Because it reduces the size of the organics. Yes. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's correct. And if I could expand on that thought, our goal there is take the highest quality of organic material and utilize the highest quality of resource value that it has. And in doing so, we provide a green energy source for our community. You know, we all use, it's not sexy, but we all use the sanitary sewage and processing systems, right? It's a fact of modern society, and it's a great service that they provide for public health. You know, but it also at the same time, you know, I was talking about 50 to 75 tons a day in our pilot and over 200 tons a day. Well, that's 200 tons a day less that's driving all the way out to the Central Valley.
Exactly. Right.
So that's a win. That's a double win, right? So I'm really proud of that. And great people like Grant and our technical team, Hillary Gans, Matt Southworth, these are really high quality, experienced people that are making this go.
And the O2E pilot, is that actually up and running at this point, or is that what's the time frame for it going live?
We're all set to start. We've got everything ready. Every box on the punch list is checked, and with the COVID quarantine, all the restaurants either stopped activity or highly reduced activity.
Right.
That material that we need to operate this on an economic basis. So the answer to the question is no, we are not running. We are projecting at the latest that it would open August 15th. And the reason for that, there's twofold. We're actually looking to solicit some organic material from other jurisdictions just to bring it in so we could run the pilot equipment and do systems check and do proof of concept with what's going on there. And then,
because this is an anaerobic digester, right?
We would send it to an anaerobic digester. So we're not planning to do that on site. That could be an option in the future. And I would tell you this, one of our real limitations to some of our activities is we are in a very confined 16-acre facility. And it was fine in 1982 when the whole organization, the predecessor organization started. But now the demands and the needs of what we need seem to take larger footprints of everything, and we have to keep carving that pie smaller and smaller. So there is an option. I'm not going to get specific about it. There's an option that we are enthusiastically pursuing about possibly getting some access to some more acreage that would help us keep some of this stuff so-called in-house. And now we don't have the trucking portion of it. And my gosh, I would think that would be in direct alignment with the goals of this commission's charter. And we would look to you guys for support and all of your counterparts throughout our 12 agencies demanding that we're able to move forward with this initiative. It's
yeah, really interesting. And I should, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm also have a role with Peninsula Clean Energy. A member of your team, Hillary Gans, reached out to me. Yeah, reached out to me in relation to this project. I'm a little overdue in circling back, but I am bringing this project to the attention of our Power Resources team. And I think there's, you mentioned, 4 times the potential scale. So if I'm understanding that properly, that could be 8 megawatts of continuous power, the megawatt hours. So so it's quite interesting. And so hopefully we'll be able to set up a conversation soon on that.
That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Last couple items. I'm curious if SVWMA is exploring, obviously you're doing this with batteries, but other avenues on the state policy front around extended producer responsibility as a vehicle to try to address some of these issues.
Yes, extended producer responsibility, or EPR, is definitely a forward-thinking trend that our agency is all in on, relating to many different hard-to-handle types of materials, and in some cases hazardous waste. So for the first time in our agency's history, we've actually engaged the services of a lobbyist up in Sacramento to represent our agency's interest. Their acronym is EEC, the Environmental and Energy Consultants. They've been terrific. EEC, the principal is Reed Addis, and we couldn't be more pleased. We're just finishing up our second year, this legislative session with them. And they've gotten us access to get our message out there because we made a conscious decision, and our board completely supported us with this. We are so thankful for that. But we didn't want to just hear these regulations and law keep coming down from Sacramento. We have to implement them without any sort of voice in it. So we are very involved in the process now. And we've been asked, I've represented the agency in many, many cases, and others of our experts. Julia Au is our outreach manager. She's phenomenal. She deserves a lot of credit, and others going up into Sacramento and working with our partners at the California Product Stewardship Council, Californians Against Waste, and the League of Cities, CPSC, the county organization, a lot of them. We're trying to get our voice heard, in addition to some industry and trade lobbying organizations as well.
Interesting. And then a couple last items. One, as a user of your services, I appreciate all that you're doing. And I happen to note that you mentioned that things like strawberry baskets are going into the landfill now because they can't go through the recycling stream. Can they not go into the compost stream?
No, it would be wonderful. We want to, so we're working at the state level with industry partners like CRRA and SWANA. These are trade organizations that are comprised of our counterparts throughout the state, to try to go upstream and have product designers, instead of designing a non-recyclable plastic product, one-time use non-recyclable product, to package your.
And I'm sorry, let me clarify. When I mean the strawberries, I mean the cardboard ones, not the plastic ones.
Oh, cardboards can definitely get.
So cardboards can get. Yeah, sorry, I should have made that clear. So
good for you.
The egg cartons and the cardboard ones that are for other berries and things, those things can go into the compost stream.
If they are fiber based, the answer is absolutely. In fact, yes, we can take them. Yeah, okay. Boxes, any of that.
All right, I'm glad that I'm not leading my household astray. The last item I wanted to mention is in relation to the EV pilot that you're looking at, and here there might also be an opportunity for collaboration with Peninsula Clean Energy, as we are, PCE is looking to bring up a technical assistance program, so that could be an offline conversation.
Yeah, I did see that, Raphael, and I saw that the county, Jackie's colleagues, have a technical assistance program too with the fleet development in that area. So we're real excited about that. And Grant, maybe you want to comment on that because you're really one of our leaders in this area.
Yes, Raphael, thanks for bringing that up. And actually, Philip Kobernick, your colleague, and I have been in pretty deep dialogue the last 6 months or so because it's very complex.
Oh, great. He's the guy.
Subsidies through LCFS and how you guys are just starting your program. It's great timing, it sounds like. So I'm very excited. And yes.
Okay, glad you're in touch. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Raphael, it sounds like you've wrapped up at least this round of questions.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Cliff, questions for Roxanne or Grant or Joe?
No, very informative, a lot of information, much appreciated. No questions at this time.
Okay, thanks. Jackie.
Thank you, Roxanne and Joe and Grant, for your presentations. It's just extremely fascinating to hear about, the state-of-the-art operations that we have here in our county and some of the serious challenges that lie ahead. And I had a opportunity to connect with Roxanne before this meeting to ask some of the clarifying questions about, multifamily dwelling composting and commercial as well. So most of my questions were answered in her presentation. But I did have a question for Mr. LaMariana, and just around where SVWMA stands on potentially eliminating the waste to foreign markets and processing our waste domestically. And I understand the deep financial implications of this, but I can't help but ask.
Yeah, thank you. Yet again, another very insightful question. You guys are terrific. Definitely our heroes here at the agency. So there's an interesting dialogue that's going on since the change in the international markets, which is basically, why are we shipping this stuff halfway across the globe for processing? Why can't we do it back home? Both from an emission standpoint and a job standpoint, economic development standpoint. The short answer is, with all the achievements that we've had environmentally, many of them come with a very restrictive operating environment in terms of air district regulations and stormwater regulations. Both of those weigh heavily in the manufacturing and processing and reprocessing of this material. So, unfortunately, on one hand, we've taken great measures in our community to do what we can to clean up the air, clean up the water, and these tend to be very processes that affect both of those very important attributes in our natural environment. But I've had an interesting set of conversations with Jackie Spears' Chief of Staff Brian Perkins over the last year about doing exactly that, finding some way using today's technology. See, what basically happened was, years ago, we had a lot of pulping plants and processing plants here on the West Coast, and over time, the legacy plants aged out, and they were never rebuilt with modern technology because the Chinese market rebuilt with much more modern facilities, and with the increase of all these regulations, which I'm very supportive of. Believe me, I'm not anti, water and air regulations. They're really important to us, but we've got to find a better way to reintroduce these activities back here for the jobs and for the environmental benefits of not transporting the materials halfway around the globe. So Brian and I have, and by the way, this started with one question that Brian got from a resident in Belmont. He called me the next day, said, "Hey, Joe, I've known Brian for 20 years. Hey, Joe, had this interesting question," and he just kept wanting to know more and more and more about it. So I absolutely give he and Jackie, Representative Jackie Spear, credit for staying on this. I just saw him a couple of weeks ago, and he was right back on it again. We happened to see each other walking in the neighborhood with our masks on, and he was all over it. So he clearly hasn't let this go. So there's an opportunity here. We sort of have to get the stars in alignment where private, public sector entities have to put business models together and plans that make this viable. Again, I go back to the fact we're in a very constrained 16-acre site. If we had more space, we could do more things. Although we're right smack in the middle of a very dense and urban environment, a lot of these activities tend to go on the fringe of those types of population bases.
Right. Yeah, it'd be an interesting conversation to continue, and I, for the fact that it's the right thing to do, and I'd definitely be interested in SVWMA's participation in that and the community's participation in that as much as possible going forward.
That's great to know, Jackie. I'll certainly keep that in mind. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Yes, you bet.
That's all of my questions.
That's all. Okay. This is a very important, thank you, Jackie. Thanks, every fellow commissioners. This is an important topic to me. So I regret I'm going to have about 3 questions for Joe and Grant, and then I have several questions actually for Roxanne. And I'm going to kind of dovetail off the conversation about bringing onshoring back our waste. But be it what it is, China is still the largest market by far in the world, and like I said, they've built the infrastructure to receive and distribute processed waste. So, what is MRF doing in terms of meeting the revised Chinese contamination standard, the national sword policy? Are we ever going to get back into that market?
Well, to be very blunt, we think it's very unlikely.
Okay, that's that. Yep.
Yeah, even the modernization of what we're doing, we know it's going to have a dramatic impact, but we don't think it's going to be at that quality standard, honestly. We're also starting to suspect that there might have been more to this, that there might be a political motivation to it, in the sense that they were trying to develop their own domestic market instead of receiving the world's materials, if you will. Because if you think about it from their standpoint, there's some rationale to this. They're receiving all this material. And like I said, we were very proud because our plant was recovering 93% of everything that came in. That means 7% was residual. Well, they have to do something with that 7%. So they sort of got to the place, and we were a good plant. There's others that were sending 75% recoverable and 25%. So they sort of became the world's landfill.
Right. They
didn't like that. And, I respect that position. The biggest challenge I had with that whole transfer was just how quickly it happened. They have a different organizational structure to their political model, and they can make a decision and they can go with it. There isn't the debate and all the channels of legislative representation, et cetera. They had the People's Congress in October of 2017, and one of the outcomes was to make major inroads on their well-chronicled environmental issues there, and this was one of those pillars of improvement. So we think that we're now kind of looking back reflectively and understanding a little bit more, and it's hard to argue with that, I guess, but it just happened so quickly. That's what caught the industry a bit off guard.
Right. And so what I hear you saying is the reality is the likelihood of our MRF sending materials there is pretty nil. And so
yeah, it's just Susan, it's just that very top tier of like the most pristine of the
sure right
is probably still going to find its way over there. I'll leave that to our brokerage.
Right, but the reality is it's
yeah.
Okay, and that's I think is an important.
That's where we're at.
Yeah, because when this was brought to our attention, this was actually one of the compelling reasons to having you speak is what if any are we going to do with the Chinese market?
Yeah, well, right. As they say, China, they're done with us and we're done with them, I guess. At least the way it currently looks,
Sure.
Never say never.
All righty, thank you on that. Here's a question for Grant. Grant, you talked about Recology. And EV, their Recology is going to be conducting an EV pilot truck tests or something along those lines. My question to you is, do you know if those batteries are virgin or are they refurbished?
So Susan, thank you for the question. I guess, so first, just to clarify, as Joe helped clarify, I didn't quite fill in the detail at the end of how, obviously Recology is buying the trucks, so it's a pure collaboration with them. And we look forward to hopefully reaching that conclusion that we'd like to pursue the EV pilot. But to your major question about the battery sourcing, to my understanding, the BYD, a Chinese company, the Lion Manufacturing, they're in Canada, they're sourcing their batteries as new batteries, mostly from China, because CATL and the other major Chinese battery manufacturers are dominating that market. And so those are all new batteries. Maybe the follow-up kind of point to your question is, maybe you're also kind of wondering, what happens when those are fully expended, kind of like the solar panels we have on our roof? That's a great question too. And I think for the solar piece, that timeline's coming much faster than the batteries, because these batteries often have a 5-year warranty, but our trucks are going to last at least 10 years
sure.
later in the cycle. So it's a great question.
Sure. Let me share with you the genesis of my question. There is the creation of a battery is a highly destructive process. And it's mining. And actually, some of the mining that has to get done, whether it's lithium, but then there's also sand mining. And that's very destructive for the sea, the ocean out of Southeast Asia. So, I think really what has to happen is, while we talk about an EV fitted truck with clean air and low noise, to some degree you're offshoring what I'll say, you're offshoring greenhouse gas production and mining. And I think that's what has to be taken into account.
For sure.
And that's the genesis. So that's the genesis of my question, is offshoring your greenhouse gas production and extraction operations, because that's what you're doing. And then your point about once these batteries go, what do you do with them? And I don't know if your agency has any control over this, is to ask Recology, is to maybe is to build these trucks with refurbished batteries, and to, when the batteries are depleted, to stock them up with refurbished batteries.
Sure. Thank you for your very full cycle question on this issue. And so,
yeah, you got to look at supply chains. You know, at the end of the day, we're just a point in a supply chain, but you got to look up the supply chain and down the supply chain.
Right. And to your point, especially for lithium, the extractive process, especially with child labor in Central Africa. And
yeah, I mean, yeah, you can go into a whole, I mean, you can go into a whole host of issues, and there's really no reason why we cannot refurbish. We have the technology. And that would in child labor issues and all the other aspects that go in. So maybe you two could work with Recology, and I don't know what can be done on that front. Here's a question I have, and then I'm going to move to Roxanne. On the organics, organics, what is it? The conversion, organics to energy, extrusion pilot program. Joe, you had mentioned, the system's ready to go. We're waiting for food from the restaurants. And I hear what you're saying, but, I'm thinking too, the residents, because we're all eating here at home, the residents are they've got food that's going out. How about government hospitals and schools? They haven't closed. The multifamily family dwellings have organics that are being what I'm going to say, dumped or, thrown out. Can you not use organics from those three sources, or is it just primarily set up for restaurants at this point in time? And it might be the pilot is just with restaurants.
Yeah, if I could, great, again, very insightful question. I think it has to do more with the quantity of material that we can segregate and pull out. The pilot program is not set up to accept brushy green waste. It is very explicitly calibrated to handle food waste. So, so we've targeted source separated organics, something we would call an organics program. So if you go through the city of San Mateo downtown and you look behind a lot of restaurants, you'll see a green cart or a green bin out there. That means that they're participating in this program. So we have a truck, Recology has a dedicated truck, a dedicated route that will pick up that material. They come back to the transfer station, they drop that material in a very dedicated spot, and that material then gets loaded into the organics to energy apparatus and starts the cleaning and sorting process and getting it ready for the wastewater treatment plants to meet their specifications. The material that goes into the residential waste stream, or organics stream, I should say, like an article, as we were just talking a moment ago, my wife just walked down our stairs with our bucket of organic material she was putting out into the to the green cart. So we're fanatic about it. But that material goes in a different area, and it's really hard on a industrial scale to pull that material back out. Once it's mixed up with the yard waste, it's quite challenging, and we really can't do it cost effectively. So the other thing that is happening, like I said, we're looking on a short-term basis until our tonnages build back up. And right now we're about halfway where we need to be. So we're not that far off. We think in the next couple months it'll continue building when the restaurants continue to reopen and all that. But we're also looking at trying to get, I don't want to name the party because they haven't fully committed yet, but one of our neighboring communities handles this material and they send it to an alternate place. We're trying to intercept some of that and maybe take some of their surplus just to get our project going. Secondly, when the material, when the equipment in the MRF is fully installed, it's going to allow us to take the targeted organic material in garbage we will take that material and actually do a pre-sort on that new equipment after hours. So during the day, it'll sort recycling equipment, recycling materials, and then after hours, we're intending to do another swing shift of sorting on that brand new equipment that's supposed to be done in mid-July and bring it over. They'll do a pre-sort in the MRF, and then they'll bring it over to the organics to energy apparatus, and then that'll be feedstock there. That'll be about a quarter to a third of what we're expecting. And that's the stuff that's super innovative. There's nobody in America that's doing that right now. We're so excited to try this, but we just don't have the apparatus up. So that's what I'm saying. By mid-August, we're going to be up and running on this stuff one way or the other. And I'm hoping sometime before that, we'll be able to get this other material either by the economy kicking back up again and generating it, or we can supplement it with this other jurisdiction's material. So
sure. So
one way or the other, by the end of the summer.
Yes, what I hear you saying is now I understand. Yeah, and I have seen those green bins in front of certain restaurants. How about cafeterias? Cafeterias of hospitals and schools. I think that's another source point that you could get to. And frankly, we have, San Mateo County, I'll just talk about the county, has got a very large proportion of public institutions. I'll say hospitals and schools.
Yeah.
And besides the restaurants, that to me is another great target. We have a few big businesses, not that large. They have cafeterias. Oracle comes to mind.
Facebook. Yep.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah. But I would, and you're going to hear me talk about in some of my other questions. I'm not hearing much discussion about what's being done with hospitals, public hospitals, and public schools. And those are going to be some of my questions for Roxanne, since she oversees the solid waste diversion in our city. Okay, I have no further questions. Roxanne? I'm
here.
Yeah. Hi. Could you do me a favor, and could you put up the CAP slide with the executive summary? I'm going to refer to that.
Do you see it, Susan?
No, I don't.
Okay, I have to go here. Wait one second.
Yeah.
1 second. Okay, now here, let me see. Here we go.
Okay, great. Okay, super great. Thank you. And so Roxanne, here, I'm going to now focus in on some specific city questions here. And before I get into SW1 through 3, I do have a question for you. In the packet material, it notes that MFDs and commercial businesses are charged a rate of 75% of the garbage collection to haul away organics.
It's an additional fee at this time.
Right, it's an additional fee. Does that fee apply to public hospitals and state schools?
Actually, the state schools do not use Recology services or our services. They basically source out, and they have their own service providers. So I can't answer that question because we don't have any of the public schools serviced by Recology at this time under our contract.
Okay. Do you know anything about the hospital? I'm thinking about CHOPE. CHOPE is the largest employer in our city with 3,800 employees.
Actually, I will probably defer to Joe just because he worked for the county. It does fall under our program, but they are a county program. So they pay the county rates, and they also don't fall under our purview. They fall under the county purviews.
Right. Okay.
Mills Hospital does fall. Mills Medical Center does pay the city franchise rates, but the hospital falls under the county purview.
Right. And so when they fall under the county purview, does that mean that Recology, the city is not involved at all with their
they pay. I believe Recology is their service provider, and it's probably Recology San Mateo County, but their rates are established and are set by the county, not by the city.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you. Here's another question I have. You had mentioned during your presentation, and you cited the Passage complex with 1,000 units. That is PW being involved with the assessment in terms of waste, the ability of, I'll just say the ability to store containers and for them to be easily retrieved. And for residents, by the way, I would imagine what would be really important is making sure they're easy for residents to get to, because if it's not, they're not going to be recycling and composting. Would you do a same review for that for the county hospital? And the reason I say that, the county hospital is going through a major retrofit right now.
Again, it's a county facility, so I don't have any jurisdiction over the county, but I can assure you the county staff, Office of Sustainability is right on top of it. So I'm sure they're actively involved. I can't speak for them, but I can't imagine that they're not.
All right. But yes, so my question was, if you're doing it for Passage, are you also doing it for the hospital? And you're saying, no, we just don't have the jurisdiction.
Right. Their franchise fee, their rates are established by the county. They're a county facility. They have I think Joe can probably answer better than I can on this, but as Joe worked for the county for quite a while, but I'm sure they're taking the forefront in development of there. I can't imagine that they're not, but I wouldn't see their plans. I have no jurisdiction over a school or the county hospital or facilities.
Sure. Okay. All righty. And then my questions here, I'm now going to focus in on the cap. And what I have, as everyone can see, what I've highlighted is the 3 cap measures. This is our 2020 cap measures. Oh,
I'm sorry, did it go away?
Okay, yeah, it went away. Yeah,
can everybody see it? I just want to make sure.
Yeah. Can everyone see the executive? This is a page off the executive summary, and highlighted is the 3 metrics that have to do with solid waste, SW1 through SW3. And I think there's a couple of things to point out. When one adds up, and you've got it for 20, looking off across the side, you've got what you have is the metric ton carbon dioxide reduction. So we've got metric tons and carbon dioxide reduction for 2020, 2030, and 2040. And I think what's important, the reason this caught my attention, the reason I wanted to show everyone, is if you add what is expected to be the CO2 reduction from SW1 through SW3, it adds up to roughly 2,200 metric tons of carbon dioxide reduction. Well, when you look at that 2,200, it's roughly, by the way, about 21% of the total for 2020. And if you look at what the solid waste carbon dioxide reduction for 2030, when you add that up, when you look through, once again, S1 through S3, you come up with roughly almost 20,000 metric tons. Well, 20,000 metric tons is roughly a little bit over 10% of the 119,000 expected to be reduced in 2020. And when you go into 2050 and look at and add up, it's add the S1 through S3 carbon dioxide reduction. You look what's expected in 2050, it's roughly about 9.7%. So here's my point, everyone. This solid waste diversion reduction is a big part of our CAP program. A big part in 2020, representing 20%, in 2030, representing 10% of that whole number, and in 2050, almost representing 10% of that whole number too. So here are going to be my questions. And this is where I struggled a little bit, Roxanne, when I was reading the packet that was sent to us. It was stated that in 2018, the actual waste production for a resident was 4.7 pounds of waste per resident per day, and 8.5 pounds per waste of waste per employee per day. And so here's where I'm trying to understand, how do I take those numbers and begin to understand how are they going to impact, or how is it measured? In this case, we're just talking about waste, and so how would I take all that waste? And waste to me is it, if I'm understanding it, is waste is defined as what's going to the landfill. Is that fair?
Correct.
So I've got 4.7 pounds of waste per person per day, and 8.5 pounds per waste per employee per day. And so how do I take those numbers and measure them against any S1 through S2? See, I'm trying to correlate all of this, and I'm having some problems. Let me do another example. You know, if we look at the organics to energy exclusion pilot program, or when it goes into full production mode, you know, how will it impact S1? S1 is composting program.
Susan, if I may take that answer.
Sure. Yeah.
So honestly, converting any of our CAP actions into greenhouse gas reductions is a very complex process, which is the reason why we hire professionals to do our greenhouse gas inventories, and we typically only do them on a 5-year basis. So there is no easy formula we can hand you where you can make those calculations and figure this out. We really do rely on professionals in the industry, and it is not something that's simple or really easy to calculate on one's own. So we do track more qualitative metrics in our CAP, like we track overall trends in waste reduction and expansion percentage of households that are composting. And then we, you know, pretty much every 5 years or sometimes sooner, do a full inventory and see how we're tracking. And the inventories, as you may recall, do look at each component of the greenhouse gas emissions. They look at the solid waste emissions, they look at transportation emissions, existing building stock. So they do calculate it at that point, and we can see if we're reducing. So it doesn't, we don't have an answer to your question, but
and it again, may not be answerable, by the way.
Yeah, it's not answerable at our level.
Well, no, and actually it's a tough question. And I know a lot about modeling. It is, you know, sure, you could look at the waste per person per day, or the waste per person per employee per day, and you could say, all right, it's going down. I don't know if it necessarily translates into a reduction of 950 metric tons of carbon dioxide. I don't know that. I don't think anybody might not know that either.
I think the emphasis is, if you look at this, well, yes, the total is close to 20,000 or more than 20,000 metric tons. But if you look at where the majority of it is, it's in composting. So where can we have the biggest impact is in increasing the uptake of composting. So that's just, you know, an important consideration. Although, as Roxanne has very clearly outlined, that's also one of the most challenging.
Sure. Yeah. And that is, if you look at, SW1, that is the largest component. And then you've got the other two components. I guess what you're saying is there's really no way to measure whether 950 metric tons of carbon dioxide has been reduced. What we do measure is, for example, the amount of organics that ultimately end up going to the organics to energy extrusion pilot, soon to be into full production mode. I mean, that's what you're saying.
I think that's a more important thing to measure, but I'm not saying there's no way to measure. I'm just saying it's not something that's easy to do and requires advanced professional assistance.
Yeah. Well, you know, I don't know whether that's something, you know, and it is hard to do. And I see what you're saying at the city level. It might be something to consider at the city level one day, is to see exactly how much is really being reduced. But with that, I think I've kind of run out my questions here. Let's open it up to the public. And do we have any speakers from the public? Okay, I see one hand. Okay. Adam, would you like to, Adam Lorraine?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Hooray.
Okay, great. Cookie, you know, Cookie, I can keep track of time. That might be easier on my end.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah. And Adam, as you know, there's 3 minutes, and what I'll do is roughly at about 2.5 minutes, I'll just chime in, and at 2:45, when there's 15 seconds left, I'll give you another chime.
Thank you, Chair Rowinski. I'll do my best to be brief. As we've spoken about a lot tonight. So commissioners, staff, and presenters, thank you very much for this item and getting in deep on it. I specifically want to thank Chair Rowinski and the presenters, including Ms. Murray and our guests from SVWMA for a great presentation and in trying to tackle how to correlate what we're talking about to the goals we have in our climate action plan, because to me that is very important. I sent Roxanne a number of perhaps too granular questions related to this, and we've already talked a bit about it today. I just want to say that I hope that going forward, updates such as these can be as connected to the goals as possible. And if we cannot do it all the way, that's fine. And I appreciate what has been brought here today. I feel like I learned some more figures, but actually I'm a little concerned. For example, the diversion figures that were shared from the city, 64% in residential, and then a lot lower in multifamily dwellings and commercial. I realized there, Roxanne mentioned something about how not all of it can be captured. So they may in fact be sort of net higher, but still I think there are some challenges there. Those numbers, are not where I think we'd like them to be. I think that's fair to say. And when I think about a little bit of what is coming up that may help on this, AB 1826, I was sort of hoping I would get to learn a little more about that, because I'm thinking about how can the city help what our presenters from the county are doing. And then to me, I think one of those ways would be to increase our residents' capability to contribute to compost recovery. And AB 1826 was supposedly going to, mandate much higher participation on that. And so I'm just curious to learn at some point where we might be on that, as it was listed in our last climate action plan. We heard about the 2 programs from the county, and then rate incentives seem to be, to me, to be the next big thing that we need to tackle. I appreciate Roxanne mentioning that there will be some work with a consultant and an update in September. So I guess I may need to tune in September to hear a little bit about what's happening there. But certainly it strikes me as difficult to make a whole lot more inroads in organics or maybe anything else on the city level if the rate charge is additional. How are these property owners and MFDs going to opt into a significant extra cost to participate in this program, and thereby how are we going to get there? Hopefully we can find a way to make it so it's not that bad, and find a way to get incentives for people who are doing the right thing. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Adam. You were right at 3 minutes, so I appreciate that, because I really do hate to interrupt our speakers. I see Carol. Carol's got a, Carol?
I have a quick question. I've been hearing about the Half Moon Bay material recovery facility for a long time, but I've been confused about something that Rafael Reyes asked too. So where is the treatment works? Where will the digester be? And is there a CNG conversion system there? It's the Half Moon Bay wastewater treatment plant. And that's with Joe La Mariana.
So is your question, or is this a question, or this is a comment period?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. This is a.
If there's a way I could find out that answer, I will try to website.
So Carol, yeah. Can Carol reach out? Who could Carol reach out to for her question after the meeting? Roxanne,
I would be glad to offer anything, and I think Joe and I would both be available for questions.
Okay.
At any time. And our contact information is available. I'm the only Roxanne in the city, so you're going to find me. And I think Joe's the only Joe at the SVWMA, so both of us are pretty easy to find.
I'll find you. Thanks much.
Thank you.
All right.
Madam
Thanks,
Chair,
Carol.
I can answer some of these questions when it's appropriate.
What's that? I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, I can answer some of the questions that have been posed when it's appropriate. I realize we're in public comment right now.
Sure. Well, I see we have no other further questions or comments, and this is a comment period, so maybe we should just stay. We'll just stay with comments, and I think then Carol, if you have a one-on-one with Carol, that will be probably good for everyone. So, I'm seeing no more hands raised. I'm going to bring anyone else like to speak? Okay. Okay, thank you, Carol and Adam. I'm going to bring the discussion back to the commission for final comments and any questions. Raphael?
I do have one follow-up for Mr. LaMariana, and that is in keeping with exploration of energy generation options as possible vehicle for waste reductions. I'm curious if the industry or if Rethink Waste is at all looking at pyrolysis processes.
Madam Chair, may I answer that?
Please, yes.
Okay, thank you. The chair. Thank you.
Yeah, Joe, this is comments and questions from the chair. This is our last round from the commission. Yep.
Gotcha. And Madam Chair, I can answer some of the questions you posed earlier. I have specific information if you'd like. But to answer Committee Member Reyes's question, we have no current plans for pyrolysis. The emissions that takes place with that is something that doesn't appear to be a good fit for what we do at this time. So, and I know that's a very rapidly changing field, so I'm not going to say no forever, but at the moment that is not in our game plan, so to speak.
Okay, thank you. That's all I've got.
Okay. Jackie?
Sure, thanks, Susan. I also had a follow-up question for Roxanne. Just around the rate for single-family composting, is there a reason currently, I know that this is under study, but is there a reason currently that single-family dwellings receive composting at no cost, but multifamily dwellings, and property owners and commercial properties receive it at a cost?
These rates were established in 2004, and it was at that time green waste was pretty much predominantly the material that was collected. So, and that's at the time was easy and cheap to process. So there wasn't a greater need, and we weren't throwing more things in there. So that's why we're looking at now. It's got to be across the board. Somehow there has to be equality in how we set these rates. What that will be, we're still in the learning process. I'm, again, just submitting information to the consultant, but that will definitely be a consideration going forward.
Sure. And I guess a follow-up question to that would be whether the results of the study would come to the commission or directly to council. Just curious about if we would get to see the results.
Oh, well, I think it's a rate study, so it definitely, I'll defer to Brad and to Matt, but I would definitely think it would definitely be coming before the commission, and definitely I would think there'll have to be a lot of outreach too, because there'll be change. Mm-hmm. And like we talked earlier, change is always different. So I think there'll be public outreach and public input or at least some type of public involvement, and especially being presented to the commission for consideration.
Sure. I guess just a follow-up comment to that is, I just think it's extremely important, for us to update the cost structure. I know that that's why we're undertaking the research, and to really reduce the burden on property owners, and also just to expand equitable access to everybody in San Mateo, who can and should be participating in composting. So that's Yeah.
I can answer one question to that or just respond. When the council did set up this program as it exists right now, the goal was to be taking that, the food, the organics that were going into the garbage and taking them out. So if you were able to do that, then you should also be able to reduce the size of your garbage container.
Mm-hmm.
So there was to be some type of equality in the rates in the aspect that you would be taking debris out of your garbage container, which is the highest or the most expensive commodity, and putting it into a secondary container at a lesser price, and then reducing your garbage can. And truthfully, in most of our restaurants, that did happen.
Mm-hmm.
So we did see a decrease, but we also have to cover the cost of services. And again, in multifamilies, there just isn't as much interest. But when we go in and actually speak to them, we talk about the potential for future cost reduction. So it's not like we're trying to gouge an initial 75% or an increase in cost. We actually do a cost comparison so they can see if you take this out, it's going to go someplace you're reducing the size of your container. So the goal was that there would actually a cost savings. We just, and it's still difficult to sell. Mm-hmm. But we do a full audit and we go in with a quote to show them the differential.
Sure. And I understand that there's, a lot of outreach to be done both with property owners and with residents too. And just interested to see that work move forward and know that it's really important to help meet our requirements under the state mandate for to 2022, I believe. I think just the work, moving on to my second comment, just the work around battery safety is just extremely important. And thank you, Joe, for highlighting that. It's really imperative the work around AB 1509 is moved forward, and just to ensure really the safety of the operations and in turn our community. I think lastly, I just want to acknowledge that it's really impressive the amount of work that's being done, both Roxanne and Joe and Brandon and all of your team. And I just want to acknowledge that behavior change around waste is extremely difficult. And I know that it will require all of us to do our part, and it require a lot of outreach and communication, especially if there are rate changes. And so I guess just as somebody who lives in a multifamily building myself, I was already starting to think about how to engage my property owner and landlord and neighbors. Really, I think it's behavior change doesn't come easy. So I think it will require all of us to do our part, and just really want to commend you all for your work, and thank you so much for the presentations this evening.
Sure. Thank you, Jackie. Cliff, any final questions, comments?
Sure. Mostly I just wanted to thank everybody. Excellent presentations. Particularly I want to thank Roxanne and the city staff. Has always been great in this area. There's a lot to do. I expect the rates will come before this commission as part of the public outreach process. I would expect that. I won't speak for Brad, but since he's muted, I will. Yeah, I'm quite certain they'll come before this commission. So I don't have anything further to say. It was lengthy, but very interesting. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. And then I'll wrap up here with some final questions, comments. And Joe, you mentioned that you had some information on my prior questions, but I will piggyback on Cliff's comments about the rate review coming before the commission sometime over the fall, and that might be standard protocol. I remember the sewer rates coming before our commission. But Joe, you mentioned that you had some information from my prior questions you wanted to share.
Yes, Madam Chair. You were asking specifically about the hospital and the schools. So for 4 years, Roxanne and I worked together at the site in the recycling department. And when she left for the city, I went to the county of San Mateo, and I was a section manager for 10 years in public works. And I was responsible for greening all the, excuse me, I should restate that. My team was responsible for greening all county facilities. There were 70 owned properties, and the medical center was certainly one of the very largest. In fact, it's the largest of
It's
them all.
the largest, yeah.
Yeah. So we had a very aggressive team doing everything we could to work with the local program and property managers to have every type of service that was available to be represented on that campus. So I can't speak to where it is now in the 4 years that I've left and I've been running this agency, but I imagine that the county has maintained that enthusiastic effort. Jackie and her colleagues are involved. Jackie, that's Gordon Tong. So that might be a question for Gordon there, but I know that they take this very, very seriously for them. Relating to the schools, I can be very specific there as well, Madam Chair. It is a division of Recology that has won these school contracts, but it's not the Recology of San Mateo division that is the franchisee of our agency. This is actually a different business unit of Recology. It's Recology of San Bruno. And just to be super confusing, they're based in Burlingame. So it's kind of a little hard to follow the bouncing ball, but they have an independent contract. Schools are not bound by local franchise agreements. That's been established by case law that occurred back in the 90s. So what happens is the schools put out a scope of work in their request for proposals. It tends to be a very abbreviated scope of work. It doesn't have the fully comprehensive and embellished programs that the franchises have. So by definition, they tend to be a much smaller scale, and they tend to be cheaper for the schools too. So what happens is the winners of these contracts throughout the state are not replicating the local programs that are available in the franchise areas. So it's a little bit of an anomaly right now where schools, I want to say there's about 107 schools in our entire service area, the 100 square miles that we operate in have 107 schools in them. And we've got a team at the agency, and also Jackie has counterparts also with Gordon Tong's team that reach out and work with the schools to maximize and have them embrace as many of the programs as we can offer. And I know the SVWMA has been very aggressive. We did a pilot a couple years ago working with schools to get them to use all of the services and have San Bruno Recology work with us to support that. And it's been actually very successful. And there's about 20 of the 107 schools have been transitioned over. But of course, with the shutdown, with the quarantine, I kind of think I don't think we're back to square one, but it definitely backwards. So
yeah, it's set back.
Yeah. Our teams are going to have to rev it up when everything sort of resumes whatever normal is going to be in the future. So I just wanted to add that insight. It's a program that I managed and ran, so I'm pretty familiar with it.
Yeah, and like I said, it's just and we have a lot of public buildings, hospitals, clinics, but I'll just say hospitals and schools. I'll just focus on those two entities. And there's a lot of food production. The Expo Center, right. Yep. Yeah, that's another one right up there. Okay.
You bet.
Alrighty. I just have one question here for Roxanne, and then I think we'll start to wrap up the night. Roxanne, you had mentioned that PW does a review for new developments. You discussed about the Passage project. I'm just curious, is that review formal building code or?
Oh, it falls under the planning department. So we're involved in all new development. So you can't actually get your permit till we actually sign off.
Okay.
So we review it. And then not only do we review it, I send a secondary review to Recology and require a letter from Recology stating that they can safely service it. We're verifying. So we have a check and balance. So when the actual services go in and there's not modifications, Recology would notify me. So we're always staying on top of it, that they're committed to what they signed up for.
Got it. Okay, right. So the planning commission, if this was missing or was incomplete, would be flagged during a commission meeting on project.
It has to be approved, and there's an approval process, and we're part of that approval code. Sure. So it doesn't go forward until they meet the requirements that are required.
Okay, very good. Okay, thank you. I'm just going to say a comment here, and I really want to thank Roxanne and Joe and Grant. You do very, very important work here, not only in terms of the collection of waste, but also greenhouse gas reductions. And I'll tell you, if I was to look into the future, I see a tsunami of waste. You know, if we look at what COVID had created, you know, we have this thing called e-commerce, and as we know, e-commerce was getting traction in terms of overall retail sales. One could argue that COVID had just accelerated that trend tremendously. So what I see is an enormous amount of waste, fiber, non-recyclable products that in sheer volume are just going to grow. And I see that as a big challenge. So, but I think we've got 3 very good people and several others I know within each of your teams that will help guide us through this. On this, I want to thank Roxanne and Joe and Grant for your time and interest in receiving feedback from the Commission as well as the public. I want to thank the public for attending. And I'm going to wrap up this agenda item, and then we'll go into the final agenda item, which is reports and announcements. Does anyone have any reports, announcements that they would like to share? Okay. I'm not seeing any. I'm not seeing any hands raised. Everyone wants to go home. And then this meeting, our June 9th, 2020 commission meeting, is now formally adjourned. Thank you, everyone.